la la. Hello everybody and welcome to a video talking about congressional research. I've made this video multiple times before, but came to the realization after the rough cut edit that was 55 minutes that I should probably be splitting it up for beginners and those who are more advanced. This is the beginners video. I'll do an advanced one too, going over national circuit, all that kind of stuff. But this is for people who have not yet really gotten into the flow of creating research documents, don't really have a system for how you go about researching. This is your video. If you already have a research practice that works for you, move on to the next one. You're going to benefit more from the more advanced stuff. So without any further ado, today we're going to be going through what is a docket, what to pay attention to in pre-reading, how to pull sources, claims, and impacts, setting an agenda, going over group prep and prep documents, and then a couple tips at the end. And by that I mean scattered throughout, because if I think of them and think of more things as we're going through, then yeah, I'm going to try and explain it to you in a way that makes sense. Okie doke. So first things first, what is a docket? A docket is the full package of legislative items that a tournament is going to release for you before you have to debate. Usually this docket, if you're at like a local tournament, has between 10 and 15 items, and you have 10 days to 2 weeks to be able to prepare all of the items. For new debaters, that can be very overwhelming just to see all of these different resolutions. Everything's on a different topic. So coming up with a strategy for how to approach your docket is going to make it so that when you see this docket, you're not getting overwhelmed. It feels manageable. You're able to split it into less work, and you see that it's really not that bad. It gets worse once you get to like the 50 item dockets, but this is manageable. You should have a strong introduction and a good foundation so that when you do get to those larger dockets, they also feel manageable. When you first see a docket given to you by a tournament, what should you be paying attention to in order to have really, really effective first round of pre-reading and prep? The stuff that you want to know is what each item is intending to do and how they're going to accomplish that. Remember that if you have a bill, then that's going to be introducing or altering some law. If it's a resolution, that's a suggestion for how Congress should change its actions or something that it should do. Constitutional amendments, self-explanatory, amending the Constitution, but those different forms of legislation are going to play into how you are going to be first approaching each piece of legislation. So say, for example, that you have a bill. If you're thinking of running on the negation and you see an issue with the enforcement mechanism or the time frame, or there's an issue for solvency, meaning that the legislation is insolvent if it were to be passed, nothing would change from the status quo, then those are all things that you want to take note of the first time that you're pre-reading. Generally, when you are doing that pre-read through the docket, you don't want to choose a side yet. You want to kind of keep an open mind of like, okay, if I were to speak on affirmation, these are some points, these are some things, claims that I could branch off of. If I were to speak on negation, here's the same. If there are any questions that come up when you're reading, you don't know a time frame, you don't know an agency, you don't know a word, you want to write those things down too, or highlight them, or just Google them when you have a second. You have a search engine in front of you. So if that is an option, good option to take, just to be aware right away of what the legislation is going to be doing or introducing or changing or amending. And that's what you're paying attention to that first time that you're pre-reading. The second time that you go through your docket, you're going to have a better idea of the different themes. So maybe you have a bunch of environmental legislation. Maybe you have a bunch of economic legislation. Maybe you have a bunch of resolutions that are on international grounds. If I were you, I would group those into different themes. So economy, environment, international, whatever. And within those themes, choose one that you're really interested in. If you love the environment and you love environmental policy, then yeah, let's start there. When you first look at the piece of legislation, not the pre-read, but when you're going to start to prep arguments, what you want to do is go through line by line by line by line of the legislation, and anything that you think could be delved into for a contention or a block, so refuting or blocking someone else's contention on the opposite side of the debate as you, take note of it. Since you are a beginner and since this is probably going to be very time consuming. I'm going to recommend that you only choose one side at this point. So once you kind of have an idea of, okay, I think this legislation is a good idea, I want to stand in the affirmation, or I think a lot of people are going to go on the affirmative, so maybe I should give a speech on the negative, then once you pick a side, stick with it and just run with it. After you've chosen a side of the debate for your piece of legislation, you're going to need to start putting together some claim and impact pairs. Remember, in an argument, there are 4 different sections within each contention. Contentions are arguments. And that's your claim, warrant, data, impact, CWDI. Some people also do analysis. If you ever work with Parker Decker, he's going to tell you do analysis as well. And that's just like one step further. I do paired analysis impact, so they kind of work in with one another. People teach it differently, but I do CWDI, claim, warrant, data, impact. First time that you're reading through the legislation, that's just your pre-reading, getting all your ideas. Second time is when you have chosen your side and you're going to start to put together some contentions. So when you're doing this very close reading, any claim that you believe can be elaborated upon to create an argument, write down. Remember, claims are the assertions. They don't need warranting, data, or an impact at the very, very first run through of this legislation prep. So just be aware that when you are creating those claims, it's not foolproof the first time that you do it. It's just, this is the gist of what I'm arguing. You also want to have the impact in there. If you have a claim and you don't have an impact, you are forgetting to tell people why they should care. And that's really the part of the argument that's driving home the scope, the magnitude, the probability, time frame, all that kind of stuff. So have the claim, have the impact, and try to get 3 of these pairs on each side of the legislation. So now, in your prep stages, you've read through all of the legislative items, you have an idea of them, you have come up with which side of the debate you're going to be wanting to debate from, and a claim and impact pair at 3 is your goal. You want to have 3 for each of them on the side of the debate that you have chosen. Don't have them split between 2. And now you need to start putting together some speeches, some contentions. There are different ways that you can construct a speech. My preference is always a mini legal pad. I think that they are cute, first off. And second, you're never going to, if there's a power outage or the Wi-Fi is not working, or if you can't use Wi-Fi inbound, be left without research because you're going to have everything in your hand. You can gesture with them. It's easy enough to highlight stuff if you need to just draw attention to wherever on the page the claim, dates, representatives, whatever are. And it's convenient and it's consistent, and it's something that I got very used to and started to really enjoy. The other way to do things is with a research doc. I'm going to talk you through the research template that I give all my kiddos, which is just a very generic, here is what a research document should look like and all of the elements that you should have included within it. I'll put a picture somewhere up here just so that we can talk through it at the same time. But keep in mind, when you are first going through legislation, you've chosen a side, you have a claim and an impact. Now we're going to start to flesh out the arguments. So on your research doc or on your legal pad, you're going to be putting together a bunch of information that should help you give a speech. The end goal of a research document is to be able to speak off of it. What that means is that only you need to understand it realistically. If your handwriting is terrible, if you have shorthand, if whatever, you're the only person who needs to read it, unless you're doing team research, in which case it might be helpful to write out full sentences that are grammatically correct. But up until that point, do whatever you want, knock yourself out. This is the research doc. So very, very top of the legislation, you should put a screenshot of the legislation and the title. The title is there and typed out so that when you have all of the research in one giant document, you can just do Command F and find exactly where each piece of legislation is. That doesn't happen if it's just like the title taken from a screenshot that's in the document. So be aware that you do need to type it. Right under the picture of the legislation, you're going to put the gist. So this is the purpose of the legislation, any relevant background, anything that you think should be mentioned that you need to know before you are debating. So context, if there's like a fiscal year and you don't know that fiscal years don't start on January 1st, they start on a different time of year. Do you know what time of year that is? You should probably have that date in mind. If there are any definitions, agencies, enforcements, mechanism, anything that you don't know, that's going in the top chunk of the research template above that first line. Once you have chosen a side of the debate, then that's when you pick whether you're going to be approaching the affirmation or the negation. But really, they're very similar in how you prep. Negation, you're going to have more solvency arguments. Affirmation, not many solvency arguments. You're just really going to be doing constructive claims. So, as you see, there's AGD, BG, and thesis. AGD is your attention-getting device. That is the hook of your speech. So a joke, a stat, a funny something, a anecdote, whatever is going to get attention of your audience and be able to maintain it for the duration of your speech. And then you're going to do a little link back to the hook in your conclusion. BG, background, that is any background that your audience needs to know in order for them to have a full understanding of what you will be arguing. Keep in mind that this is different than the background of the legislation that you have in the top section. You should know enough about the legislation to be able to stand for 2 minutes of questioning and answer, okay, I thought that this was true, but you're saying that, how, what? Or what's the definition of this? Or what happened when this country tried that? So you need to have like a full idea of the background that's separate from the background you would be giving the audience, because that background is specifically aimed towards this is where I'm going to be steering them on my speech. So in that second line under AGD background, any information that's relevant for them to understand in order for your contentions to make sense. Thesis, generally you can fill out a thesis right before you give a speech because you're just going to say, stand with me in the affirmation for first, blank, second, blank, third, blank. And each of those blanks is a tag. A contention tag is 2 to 3 words that's kind of just like abbreviating very broad strokes what it is that your contention is arguing or claiming. And it shouldn't be a sentence. It shouldn't be an argument. It shouldn't be an assertion. It should literally be something like economy, less jobs, anything like that. Just a couple words. So below that thesis, you're going to see this little table that has P1 through P5 in the left-hand column with tag here. Those tags, again, are the same tags that are in your thesis. That's just 1 to 3 word gist, very broad strokes of what it is that your claim is asserting. In that second column, you're going into the contention. So that is your claim, warrant, data, and impact, all within that one box. Remember that if you are prepping all of your legislation online, which I do recommend, like you're going to be researching online, you'll be able to take your links. It's easy to copy and paste information, move it over. If you are doing all of your prep on a document, but then speaking off of a padded legal pad, then when you are doing like that transfer of information from these contention boxes with your claim, warrant, data, impact, you really could just put your claim, warrant, data, impact, CWDI, and abbreviations for it on here as long as you can speak somewhat extemporaneously. Extemporaneous speaking, if you're very new to forensics, is when you are speaking without a script. Sometimes the trap that people, especially new debaters, get caught in when they're doing research docs is that they will write out every single word that they're going to say in the exact order that they're going to say them. They'll have their breaths, they'll have their pauses, they'll have their inflection, everything noted. And that's great. You can write a really strong speech like that. Except if you don't give a first cycle speech, your speech should change from a basic constructive into something with more refutation in it. And if that change happens, then that speech that you spent so much time timing out your breaths and your eye contact and where you're going to be standing in the room is useful, but it's not going to be the same. And if you give that speech in a lower cycle, so A2, N2, A3, N3, anything further, you're really going to seem out of place because you shouldn't be giving a constructive speech. You should be giving constructive contentions and responding and refuting to arguments that have already been addressed. So don't write word for word exactly what you want to say on either of these prep methods, either on a pad or on a document, but especially if you don't have that authorship speech. Because if you have the authorship, you're going to be able to give word for word. You have preferential recency, precedence, all that. You have the ability to give a speech if you wrote the piece of legislation. But if you don't have that, you don't know that you're going to be speaking in the first cycle, and all of the fine tuning that you did on that research doc is going to work against you rather than for you. That being said, when you are transferring information from an online doc to a legal pad, you need enough to be able to speak off of it. Don't just put for like claim, warrant, data, impact, 5 words if you're not going to be able to understand the argument just from those 5 words. So I always would be very sure to have the full claim written out. The warranting is pretty self-explanatory. It's how it connects back to the legislation and the data and fits within a larger context. That data, you need any figures, quantified, anything that is a number you need to remember, keep. And then the date and the source. And then the impact, fairly self-explanatory. That one you can probably abbreviate a bit more. But don't accidentally write not enough of that research onto your pad and then go up and not remember what you're talking about because it's been a week since you prepped it and you've done 10 different pieces of legislation and you can't remember if this is the argument from the New York Times or the New York Post. And like, to just be sure that when you are doing all of this work, you're actually going to be able to use it in round. Okay. Next things next, talking about setting an agenda. So when you are in the caucusing or lobbying period of any chamber, remember that's the period of time when you know who you're going to be competing against. You have your room and you're standing there passive aggressively speaking with people saying, I think that for the agenda, we should consider doing legislative item P5 first, P7 second, and P12 third. And for the second session, I would be willing to hear your ideas. That's the passive-aggressive 20 minutes before a chamber starts, where everyone is trying to put the pieces of legislation they have prepped as high on the agenda as possible, the ones that they haven't prepped as low on the agenda as possible, and get their friends to be the presiding officer, or at least figure out who will be nominated. Remember, during that caucusing and lobbying period, you're allowed to propose agendas. You're allowed to say, no, I don't agree that that's the order of the legislation that we should do. Perhaps you would consider this. You are allowed to run for presiding officer. You are allowed to say, I want to be aware that we do have some authors in the room and make sure that they do have preferential placement within the agenda so that they have the opportunity to present their legislation to us. There's different things that you're going to kind of get accustomed to within Congress. One of them is that caucusing and lobbying is very passive aggressive. People have ulterior motives and they're trying to get their friends and their most prepped legislative items as high as possible and mess everyone else up. So don't let yourself get messed up. Put your foot in the door. Try and be a little bit more forward. Remember, when you are setting that agenda, that generally you're going to want to put the full round of legislative items set for the first session. So say, for example, you have 2 preliminary sessions and you know that the parliamentarian, the person, adult in the room who's a judge who sits beside the PO, parliamentarian, is going to stay the same for both rounds. It might be a super good idea to, in that first session, set the first and second session's dockets so that once you have that lunch break or that recess, whatever is in the middle hour of time, you know the next 3 items that you're going to be getting into, and you have a chance just to go back through, practice your speeches, come up with questions, practice in blocks, go through anything that you think is relevant to get you more prepared for that second session and have it be stronger. So when you're setting an agenda, try and set it for the full session blocks. If it's 3 prelims, awesome. 1, whatever, just set it for that one. Make it work for you. Other thing I want to talk about is group prep. So group prep happens. A lot of times it happens on teams, which is great, especially if you're a novice. If you can get experience from watching other people go through their own research process and how they approach each piece of legislation, each docket. This is the way that works for me. It's not the way that works for everyone. There are other ways to research. I just haven't seen anyone explain their way of researching, so I'm explaining mine to you so that hopefully you don't need to come up with your own method within the madness and can just adopt mine and then modify it so that you have a good place to start. Anyways, if you do group prep, especially within your team, be aware that you should be prepping opposite sides of the legislation. So say, for example, that I'm working with someone on my team and we're both prepping the affirmation, and then we get to the tournament, we get in our rounds, and we see that we're in the same chamber. All of the work that we just did with one another is only going to benefit one of us. When you're doing group prep, do different sides of the legislation. One of you does affirmative, one of you does negative. And when you are coming up with ideas and contentions, work with one another. Say there's this really, really strong environmental argument on the affirmation. Maybe we can come up with a block for it on the negation. Or how would you respond if I were to say that minimum wage and increasing it is going to cause companies to lay off thousands and thousands of workers? How would you respond? Work with one another. Make sure that your group prep is making one another stronger, because at the end of the day, you're still sharing background, you're still sharing ideas, you're still preparing one another for anticipatory arguments on what the other side might say, and that's good. Group prep is valuable. But you don't want to get messed up by having both people in the chamber speak on the same side of the legislation, and then no one is happy. Just remember. I think that that's everything. We went through what a docket is, what to pay attention to when pre-reading, so remember that first time when you're just skimming, how to pull sources, claims, impacts for that second time that you're reading, setting an agenda. We also talked about online research docs versus padded research. Remember that if you are doing online research, keep the research and the work that you are doing for each tournament and develop a filing system. That'll be a different video. That splits up everything that you're talking about so that when you see another piece of legislation come in a docket later in your career that you are familiar with or have background information in, you're ready just to do it because you already did it. So yeah, anyways, be sure to have a good filing system. We talked about group prep. We talked about not being on the same side as someone who you could possibly hit within round. Take notes of the other side's arguments. If you come up with blocks for contentions when you're researching, note those. If there are questions, note those. That's it. That is the synthesized gist of it. And it looks like we haven't gone for 50 minutes, which is great. So much shorter than the other video. So anyways, I hope that that's super helpful for you. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm always available to answer them. And until the next video, have an absolutely wonderful day. Thank you very much. Goodbye.